So the theme of our first panel is achieving a fair and balanced brain circulation, which is, of course, one of the cornerstones of an effective and competitive European research area. And what we'd like to do in this session is to focus on why brain circulation is a key enabler of excellence in research, but also of research impact, so especially in terms of knowledge exchange and innovation. And the discussion will reflect on how national policies can be adjusted to facilitate this brain circulation without falling into the risk of brain drain, which is the worst case scenario, but also not putting obstacles to incoming researchers. And of course, in all this discussion, we'll be focusing on the role of the MSCA in addressing these questions. We have 3 speakers during this panel, each of which will have a 10-minute presentation, and after which we'll have time for questions and answers. So please, again, I'll invite all of you as participants to send us your questions via the platform, and we will incorporate as many of those as we can into the discussion. Okay, our 3 speakers today will be Dr. Tome Antičić from the Croatian Ministry of Science and Education, Kristin Krav from the Estonian Research Council, and Dr. Caroline Hornstein-Tomic from the Ivo Pilar Institute of Social Sciences here in Zagreb. So if we are all ready, let us begin our first panel by introducing our first speaker. So our first speaker is Dr. Tome Antičić, who became the State Secretary for Science and EU Funds at the Croatian Ministry of Science and Education in 2017. Prior to this, he was the director of the Ruđer Bošković Institute that we heard about in our keynote speech. He is an experimental particle physicist who spent his career at CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and who received his PhD from Johns Hopkins University. As a final introductory note for Dr. Antičić, as part of his presentation, he will be presenting the document prepared by the ministry as a part of Croatia's presidency of the Council of the European Union, the Zagreb Call for Action on Brain Circulation. So, Dr. Antičić, if you are ready, welcome to the conference, and the floor is yours.
Hello. Good morning, I guess, yes. And dear distinguished speakers and participants of the MSCA Presidency Conference, the Croatian Ministry of Science and Education welcomes this opportunity to present our initiative, the Zagreb Call for Action on Brain Circulation, which is the result of our efforts during the presidency, this Corona-infested presidency of the Council of the European Union. We have started developing this document already last year, as brain circulation, a good, healthy brain circulation, in fact, became the key priority of the Croatian presidency in the field of research due to the more than immense significance of this topic. As the Croatian minister, Professor Blaženka Divjak, often emphasized during her official speeches, talents are distributed evenly, but opportunities too often are not. It is our goal now, at the end of the presidency, to seize the momentum created on this topic and to call everybody to join us in this action on brain circulation. As we are all very much aware of, brain circulation has a great and very, very positive impact on the overall research and innovation union ecosystem. It connects excellence with international mobility, raises the working standards of the overall research labor market, and creates much better research surroundings and frameworks for short-term and long-term cooperation. Unfortunately, there are some challenges which are faced by the brain circulation system in the EU. The growing demand for talents and the uneven distribution are initiating clustering of research excellence and significant out-migration, i.e. brain drain, for some EU countries, unfortunately also Croatia is one of them, and regions, and usually those with low research and innovation intensity. And very importantly also, the fragmentation of the Union's national research systems is creating the inability to fully exploit potential for excellence as an important precondition for competitive science and a high-tech economy in the EU. This last point, of course, is particularly important, but is also very, very difficult to implement. But if the union wants to function as a much more coherent and a much more competitive research system, it should address this successfully. So in the absence of complementary and coordinated actions to address these challenges, the union will continue, as unfortunately we are, not in all fields, in many fields we are leaders, but in way too many fields, especially some of the more fields which are becoming more and more economically important, EU does lag. And this also destabilizes the internal market and both long-term and short-term trust in the union. So we need to encourage a fair and well-balanced brain circulation in Europe by developing a sustainable and suitable system of measures against the destabilizing effects brain drain. We need to help in the co-creation and co-design of member states' national research innovation policies and the EU support systems for the mobility of researchers. One should also emphasize the important role brain circulation has in the future European research area, and a strong boost has to be done for innovation in the EU. It's also important to anchor, to make it very clear, the concept of brain circulation around those who form it in terms of keeping, attracting, mobilizing, encouraging, and rewarding talents in the European Union. During our presidency, we have organized and co-organized several events. Some were actually, most of them were online, but some were actually in live. And these are considered to be milestones in the process of creation of this document. I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone who provided valuable contributions to this action. So here are just several of the important meetings listed. The key aspects of brain circulation for researchers and thus the areas of potential actions are clustered in the following four broad categories. There's the prosperity of researchers, there's the collaborative networks, there's the complementarity and responsibilities at national levels, and inclusiveness and participation. It is not, of course, the purpose of today's presentation to go into details of every aspect we have developed in the action. You will have the opportunity to read the full document in the weeks to come, and I'm sure you all will read it in detail. Rather, it is our intention today to give you a brief overview of the main features of this document. Regarding prosperity of researchers, it is key for the balanced brain circulation. Unfortunately, various shortcomings diminish the attractiveness of researchers' career across the EU, as well as the insufficient efforts aimed at fight for talents in terms of attracting both EU and non-EU researchers. Thus, our focus within this perspective is on the following objectives. One is to avoid further fragmentation of national research innovation systems. So this topic is not really being addressed in general, but it's extremely important. Several years ago, I asked some American scientists what is the problem with the EU, why the American system, for example, which one has to admit is more successful than the EU in many points, why cannot be implemented in EU? Well, he said, well, in America, it's just one system in general. EU, it's at least 28 or so, which makes things unnecessarily difficult, and especially because there are some good systems and bad systems, and one should converge towards the good and more competitive systems. So one should also enable a new European research area to be more tailored to suit the needs of researchers, creating attractive working conditions for more appealing researchers' careers. One needs to raise the awareness of the principles and methods for the implementation of the Charter for Researchers and the Code of Conduct for the Recruitment of Researchers. This is being successfully implemented in some member states, but in some other member states it is not. This should not be the case anymore in the future. One needs to nurture an innovation and risk-prone R&D system that should allow for stronger integration of innovation in researchers' careers. Also, it is very important to develop a culture of welcome based on greater openness and inclusion. All these areas were actually, depending on which country, but in general, all of them, or most of them, need to develop some of these points into a much stronger position. Regarding collaborative networks, the creation of collaborative networks between researchers enables the exchange of scientific knowledge and excellence, the improvement of global standards for science and research, and the creation of impetus for better national policies on career management. This can be fostered by more collaborative networks, so we should strengthen wider collaborative networks across the Union and foster administrative capacity and support for international research projects. One should also enhance openness and transparency of the existing network towards the global R&D community. It's also important to improve the research infrastructure planning between the member states and increase their effectiveness and sustainability in the European Union. We also need to facilitate new ways of diffusing knowledge, spreading knowledge, and transfer of research results to the market. Again, this is something where there's serious shortcomings in the European Union. We also need to enhance a creation of collaborative networks with the scientific diaspora as much as possible, both within the EU and also outside the EU. The Union's R&I space is fragmented, as I emphasized several times already, among numerous countries, with a tendency of uneven development and further growth of R&I pockets in higher developed countries that are in turn not big and strong enough to individually compete. No matter what they think, they are not big and strong enough to individually compete with other larger and stronger world economies, namely the United States and China. This is a reality we have to face directly. So as a result, we need to develop more inclusive and concurrent systems of research innovation networking throughout the EU with emphasis on excellence, not just safeguarding excellence, but the actual focus should be on excellence. One should increase the attractiveness of lower performing EU countries and regions to upcoming and already established high-tech R&D companies. One should ensure alignment, simplification, complementarity, and synergy of the EU framework programs for research innovation, ESSI funds, and national funds on strategic and operational levels. The alignment of ESSI funds is something which we very much, Croatia is very much pushing through. This synergy between the structural funds and the other funds is not well executed in the EU today, but I hope that for the next financial period it will be made in a much more smoother system than it is today. Today it is not working well. We should equalize the opportunities across Europe for transforming research results into viable high-tech growth and innovative startups. One also needs to promote further transparency, impartiality, and independence of the evaluation process, without, of course, compromising the principle of excellence. Excellence should be the priority of all, and it can be done, and a good brain circulation will only enhance the excellence. While there is a clear recognition of benefits of balanced brain circulation among member states, the appropriate weight of responsibility needs to be put on national levels. The individual member states bear a huge responsibility for every problem, including, for example, Croatia. There needs to be a much clearer commitment from numerous member states to invest far more in research and innovation, and to reform national science system in order to build strong framework for excellence and international relevant research. In fact, these should not be this higher investment or or a much more competitive research innovation system should not be recommendations. They really should be policy musts, I think. Thus, one needs an increased investment in R&I on national levels. One should enhance the national commitments to the adoption and implementation of the renewed European research area. The relevant parts of national funding systems must be reformed to make them more aligned within the broader EU funding system. Again, emphasis on excellence. One must assess and adjust national policies for research mobility and improve return migration programs. Also, it is important to create more effective interaction between institutions, stakeholders, and decision makers to unlock the full potential of brain circulation. One must also reduce national and EU administered barriers for better circulation of researchers, engineers, and students. So in conclusion, I hope this call for action will be fruitful. If it does become fruitful, the EU will become a much more competitive actor on the world stage, and this is something which is absolutely necessary. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Antičić, for your presentation of the Zagreb call for action on brain circulation. Very clear messages on how this is a question for Europe as a whole and not just for widening countries. It's really to enhance the competitiveness and coherence of the European research area as a whole. There is a need to address better brain circulation. And you made a lot of very good points, which I'm hoping we're going to come back to in the discussion about how more investment in research shouldn't be a recommendation, but a policy must. And about how, yes, things are now fragmented and that then leads to uneven development in different parts of Europe, which need to be addressed. So, and then I'd like to call upon also our participants to let us know if you have any questions, and we can come back to those in the discussion. So please send as many questions as you can, and we'll try and address those in the discussion. So I'd now like to invite our second speaker in this panel. Our second speaker will be Dr. Caroline Hornstein-Tomic from the Ivo Pilar Institute for Social Research here in Zagreb in Croatia. And a short introduction to Dr. Hornstein-Tomic is that she holds a PhD in sociology from the Goethe University in Frankfurt. Her professional engagement stretches from academia to the civil and public sectors. She's worked at universities here in Croatia. She's worked at the German Federal Agency for Civic Education and at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Bosnia-Herzegovina. And she's also a co-founder of a Zagreb-based foundation entitled Knowledge at Work, which is linked to the Erste Foundation. She has widely published on migration and related policies, including a focus on return and high-skilled mobility, which is precisely why we're interested in your perspective on today's topic. So we're eagerly awaiting to hear from your perspective, from a social science perspective, how you see the question of brain mobility. So Dr. Hornstein-Tomic, welcome to the conference, and feel free to start your presentation when you're ready.
Well, good morning. I'm delighted to be here participating in this panel in Zagreb and beyond in the virtual space of our European audience. Let me start with the question of how do we achieve a fair and balanced brain circulation. In order to tackle this question, I think we first need to identify push and pull factors, not only for participating in MSCA at large, but for high-skilled and EU internal so-called liquid migration or mobility, including return migration in general. And academic mobility certainly is an example in place for liquid mobility or migration. To identify those factors is crucial in order to suggest and discuss adequate national policies to facilitate free circulation. And I think the Zagreb call for action is really a milestone here and the signal in which direction we need to move. We are facing challenges which are shared in the European Union. The first one is we all are living in aging societies which need to each retain and gain a young, well-educated and skilled labor force to maintain productivity and competitiveness. In that sense, EU members are partners but also competitors. And I'd like to quote Milan Kundera, who spoke about a small nation as one whose very existence may be put in question at any moment. A small nation can disappear and it knows it. So we do talk from different perspectives. I have a problem moving on with my presentation. There we go. The next shared challenge I'd like to point out is the growing disparities which we see today between rural and urban parts, between centers and semi-peripheries, the widening social cleavages and development gaps within societies and between European regions. Those growing disparities are corresponding or maybe triggering also the rising populism and EU skepticism we are being confronted with. Ivan Krastev said when we celebrated 30 years of transition last winter, 30 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Europe finds itself threatened by a new divide. I think this is something we really need to bear in mind. Academic or high-skilled labor mobility is mostly considered today as part of the problem, and here is the buzzword brain drain. But how can it become part of the solution? Is it brain circulation and a triple win in the European research area? We do need coordinated policy responses both on national and European or EU levels. The losses and benefits of liquid mobility have to be assessed on individual and societal levels in both host and home countries in order to understand the push and pull factors which are driving mobility. On the individual level, we need to focus that mobility decisions are based on a transnational comparison of chances and risks. Individuals consider a multitude of aspects critical for quality of life in different places. An individual takes risks and builds up resilience against risk through mobility. And we need to look at the individual as a self-responsible, socially embedded, proactive actor who is looking to accumulate economic, social, and cultural capital. So to have the homo economicus in mind is a bit short-sighted. Last but not least, we need to see and consider the individual as a potential agent of change and bridge builder. In the societal context in which individuals are operating, we need to focus on the institutional and economic conditions which are weighed out against each other in international comparison. What are the career advancement prospects? What are the income levels in relation to household spending? What are contracting terms and length? What about social security, access to labor market in and beyond academia, residency permits, transferability of academic degrees, research infrastructure, and last but not least, pro-immigration policies. And there are social and cultural conditions which are being taken into consideration. The transparency of recruitment, reliability of services, non-corruption, non-discrimination, good governance, research spirit, work ethics and atmosphere, and then societal openness and cultural diversity. Tome Antičić has mentioned the welcoming environment, and last but not least, the educational environment for children. Therefore, national policies need to respond to both individual and societal levels in order to efficiently tackle the push and boost the pull factors in a collaborative effort across sectors. It was also mentioned before. National policies should be geared to selective immigration and return migration. They should facilitate dual citizenship. This is a prime factor in facilitating circulation. Provide attractive research infrastructure, clearly. Create frameworks for employers to retain contact with previous employees and assist them to resettle in previous jobs. Then incentivize philanthropy and third sources funding for academic work is crucial. Also to steer public debate about the value of science and humanities for welfare and development. Last but not least, it is a challenge to address migration skepticism both as home, because people consider too many leaving a threat, and host societies, the fear of too many incoming. This is the environment in which we discuss national policies. It is paramount to keep enhancing internationalization of national academic environments, to remove legal and institutional barriers, to provide assistance with legal regulations, for example, with regard to the eligibility for social benefits, to ensure transparency of legal pathways, to incentivize transnational mobility for academic career advancement. There is still space for action, to extend the offer of university programs and courses in English language, and to offer local culture and language courses, and also to support alumni networking. These are just a few. We need to recognize the importance of social capital as driver and supporter of mobility. To link researchers also with employers beyond academia, to monitor labor needs and vacant positions, especially in small and medium enterprises as well. To welcome the transfer of new values and perspectives. This is not taken for granted. To explore and strategize with diaspora networks and agencies. Mr. Antičić has mentioned it already. To promote competitive advantages as target society, and to reach out to individuals and communities interested in culture and society of respective countries. For example, to target graduates from language courses. This is one of the actions the German state is engaging in. Last but not least, is leaving easier than returning? It is a general remark I encounter as researcher of migration and return mobility. Why does return sometimes fail, and why does it succeed? We need to identify the obstacles to return. For example, closed local networks, the lack of or loss of social capital. We need to look into examples of successful reintegration and of contributions to development, regional and local development. We need to discuss that return is often framed as homecoming, that emotional attachment is crucial for contributing to local and regional development and for return. Return and remigration policy programs and initiatives are an interesting source to look into and to consult. And there is need for PR and outreach strategies to potential target groups because such policies and programs often are not well known. And I'd like to close my contribution here, my input, with a few questions triggered by the COVID-19 pandemic and the times ahead and what we might have to face up with. In what environment do we promote brain circulation? Are the 4 freedoms going to be reinstalled? Those freedoms are the precondition for liquid migration and facilitate transnational lifestyles we got so accustomed to in the European Union. Or are they further compromised? Then is migration and mobility going to be increasingly considered a threat and thus fueling socio-cultural polarization? Will we see more conflict around socio-cultural diversity? We here in the Central Eastern part of Europe do look into many examples currently, but it's also spread in the West. And how to enhance support of international competition in home and local environments. I'd like to leave those questions for discussion, and I'm looking forward to engage into discussing with you all. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hornstein-Tomic, for your presentation, which was great because it actually opened the questions which I think many of our participants will be much more familiar with from their personal experience, because you opened the broader societal and individual questions about mobility. So what are the factors that encourage people to leave, maybe to a better or to a similar research environment, and what are the pull factors as well? So the push factors to leave, the pull factors attracting researchers, and what are all the factors that influence those decisions. And I'd like to maybe use this opportunity to invite the participants who are with us today really to share with us. I mean, you may have a question, but I'd be really interested also to see if some of you'd like to comment. If many of you left your countries and are now in a different country, what were the push factors, and what would be, under which circumstances would you be ready to return to the countries that you left? Just so that can feed into our discussion later on. So thank you once again for your presentation, and I'd like to invite our third and final panelist to present. So our third speaker is Kristin Krav from the Estonian Research Council. Kristin Krav is the Estonia's National Contact Point, NCP, and National Delegate to the Programme Committee for 3 areas of the Horizon 2020 programme. So for the European Research Council, Marie Skłodowska-Curie Actions, and Spreading Excellence and Widening Participation. So Mrs. Krav, welcome to the conference, and we look forward to hearing your perspective and Estonia's perspective on this important question of brain circulation. So thank you for joining us, and feel free to start your presentation when you're ready.
Good morning, and I am extremely pleased to be participating in this one of the most awaited conferences to discuss researcher mobility, which is one of the topics that is most close to my heart. So today, to complement these distinguished speakers before me, I will be presenting maybe what could be called a case study. So I will be speaking about brain circulation from the perspective of Estonia, a small country, and maybe to encourage you to think about brain circulation as not an option, but as a must. So I would like to emphasize that from the perspective of a small country, from the perspective of a small research community, brain circulation is not optional. It's not something that we could take or leave. It is something that is vital. It is something that is absolutely necessary for our research system to be able to function properly, to thrive, and to create high research outputs. So in the case of Estonia, mobility experience for researchers is more or less obligatory. So we need researchers to be mobile, we need our researchers to go out of Estonia, and of course we need them to return, and we need other researchers to come into Estonia to complement our national researchers. So to give you an example how necessary this mobility is, this brain circulation for our country, let me draw your attention to these 2 facts, that to be elected to a higher academic position, such as professorship in a public university, researchers actually need a mobility experience. It is one of the criteria to be selected to a professor position. And also to be competitive in our national grants or our national personal or group grants. Again, the team leader needs to have had international mobility experience. Of course, the benefits of mobility to a research career have been widely discussed and have been clear to the all participants of the research environment for a long time now. It is a period, usually, for example, a postdoctoral period. It is a period when a researcher becomes independent, where the researcher can develop his or her own research ideas and create their own team to also obtain the experiences that are necessary for leading a team at a research institution successfully. So, of course, if you require someone to be mobile, you also need to provide means to be mobile. And these means we can divide into funding, to outgoing researchers, and also to returning and incoming researchers. So I will not discuss the funding that we are providing for PhD students. I will be discussing funding that we provide for researchers starting from the postdoctoral level. And for you to understand that in our system, we are actively mobilizing funding from all sources, I have color-coded some of these funding sources for researchers. So in red, we have national grants, solely from national funding. In light blue, we have Horizon 2020 or framework program grants. And in dark purple, we have structural funds. For many European countries, including Estonia, structural funds are very important to meet the objectives of European research area. So we utilize structural funds intensively for our research system. And you can see that we rely on national funding to a small extent to provide researchers with the possibility to go out to spend their postdoctoral period in other European or any global countries. But of course, we cannot, it's not the goal to have a funding scheme, an outgoing postdoctoral funding scheme that would cover each and every Estonian researcher who is wishing to go abroad for postdoc, because postdoctoral researchers are actually the most sought after force in the workforce, in the research workforce. So we also rely heavily here on other nationalities to provide funding for incoming postdoctoral fellowships, just like we provide a lot of support for incoming postdoctoral fellowships to work in our labs, in our research institutions, because of course we are not only sending out, we need postdocs also in our system. The Skłodowska-Curie individual fellowships and also the other schemes play a big role in being a beacon of standard in the European research mobility landscape. So we are very much also in favor of the extra funding, the widening fellowships that were mentioned by Commissioner Gabriel, because these are the widening fellowships have increased the application rate also to Skłodowska-Curie individual fellowships, both for incoming and outgoing researchers from Estonia. For returning and incoming researchers, we have really a broad variety of funding schemes. You can see that we have a lot of funding from the structural funds that is targeted on incoming and returning researchers. And these funding schemes have been very successful in getting high-level researchers from all over the world to come to Estonia, including the ERA chairs, the European Research Area chairs that are funded from the widening part of the Horizon 2020 program. But researcher mobility does not, successful brain circulation does not depend solely on these short-term funding possibilities. In fact, when we speak about brain circulation, going going abroad for a shorter period of time is not such a big problem. The big problem is to attract the mobile researchers back and to retain the incoming researchers who come to our system. So I would say that the Zagreb call for action comes at a very right time to again put this need for giving an adequate funding levels to research at the foremost importance to our politicians. Because, as was said, the crisis has put a spotlight on research community, and the research community has responded, they have come through, but now it is the duty of society and the duty of our national political systems and also the European political systems to make sure that the society is giving adequate support to our researchers to solve not only this hopefully temporary issue of COVID-19, but also we have become aware of how much our prosperity and our problem solving relies on researchers and the quality of the work of researchers. The Zagreb call for action mentions, of course, that there has to be responsibility on national level. And in providing adequate funding levels to our researchers, I totally agree that the responsibility should be on national levels. But there also has to be responsibility on the EU level. And most importantly, it is to create a researcher and research-friendly environment across the European research area. And here I also mention the aspects that are crucial for small countries that are utilizing different sources of funding. So the synergies between funding, the flexibility in managing and combining this funding is one of the key aspects, one of the key issues that we look at EU to solve for the next funding period. This utilization of the European and national funding together, different European funding and national funding together, should really keep in mind that the diversity across European Union is our wealth. The different cultures, the different environments from Zagreb to Tallinn are a wealth that we want to maintain. We don't want to level the differences between member states, but it also means that the problems and the issues that are faced by different member states are very different. So in the European funding, we cannot apply solutions that are of a type one size fits all. So this flexibility of implementation of funding do take into account the diversity of national systems. And another issue that is quite frequent and is also mentioned in the policy documents quite a lot recently is the necessity to not to look at research as something separate from the rest of the society, from the rest of activities in our society. So research and education, especially higher education, research and industry is something that is not two separate worlds. It is something that is and should be very actively combined. So we think that universities, especially in smaller research communities such as the one in Estonia, have a key role to play. A key role as training for the new generation of actors in a knowledge-based society, but also a key role as knowledge providers for the local economic actors. So the role of universities should not be underestimated, and they should remain it should be possible for the universities to remain bottom-up, fast reacting to society's problems, and also to maintain their independence, autonomy, and freedom of doing research. In the slide, I am showing you two faces. On the left, you can see Professor Lee Sigetus, one of the young researchers who have obtained her own team in this university where she returned. And on the right is Professor Mohammad Mahtab Alam, who is one of our European research area chairs that has received funding from Horizon 2020 widening program. And he has been very successful in obtaining also continuation funding from very different sources. So I think those two are both very good examples of brain circulation in Estonia. And with this, I would like to thank you for listening to me. And I will be very happy to engage in a discussion on this very, very important topic, brain circulation, that is a key for a healthy research environment in any European country. Thank you.
There's so much to do to address these issues of brain circulation, and the Zagreb Call for Actions has many different recommendations at the European level on what needs to be addressed. So the question is, where would be the ideal place to start? And are there any quick wins that we can have in this process? In the sense that if we can start somewhere, where would be the best place to start? So maybe we could start with Dr. Antičić, from your perspective, how to get a quick win to relaunch and to ensure brain circulation in Europe.
Well, I think a quick win, I think, as has been mentioned here, would be by several speakers, including me, is the simplification of this, for example, structural funds, the synergies, especially because the structural funds, the ESI funds, they mostly go to these new member states, EU 13 states, which have a bigger problem of brain drain or uneven brain circulation. And so these are actually huge funds. And the good thing is, for the period 21 to 27, 30% of them, depending on the country, is for research and innovation maintained. Well, however, the rules so far have been extremely cumbersome at the EU level, and too much freedom has been given to national levels to complicate the rules even more. So the rules should be extremely simplified. So if the structural funds are used for science and research, it should be the rules which are in that country for the science and research projects, without any further possibilities to complicate it further. So billions are available, and these should be said, they have to go for incoming, for outgoing and such. And if this is simplified, then a quick win, which can be done this year, can be done in a very effective manner. I mean, the other ones, but this is just one step. One needs a lot more step. And the thing which I did not sort of dare to say, but I'm happy Caroline did, is I think there was a requirement for a lot more English in universities all across the EU. That would help a lot, because a lot of potential of EU drawing in top talent from all around the world, including China and such, and within the EU, is hindered by the language barriers. And the language barriers are real, and I know all EU countries are very proud of the language, and that's fine, but I think certain fields and such really should be in English. And that would be a great enhancement without any actually large financial investment.
Thank you very much, Dr. Antičić. Maybe Ms. Krab, would you like to comment on this? Would you agree that simplifying rules, which does seem like a very quick and logical way of pushing things forward, would that also be your recommendation? Would you have any other views on what could be done quickly, let's say in a year or two, and which could really facilitate brain circulation?
I totally agree with Dr. Antičić, because the rules are one aspect that can be simplified and need to be simplified. But the other aspect is also the synergies, or the sort of synergistic use of different sources of funding that is, of course, part of this whole problem. And I think that we are in this very, very good position at the moment, because we are just now designing, as European Union, we are designing the rules for the next period. So it's a great opportunity, because once the rules are set for the whole financial period, then it will be difficult to initiate any big changes. But right now there is a window of opportunity, and I think that these synergies between the funding instruments is the second point of this quick fix that could help a lot.
Great. Thanks very much for that intervention. Dr. Hornstein-Thomas, do you have any additional points you'd like to make about this issue of, like, if you had to prioritize the things to address first, where you would start?
Well, as a researcher, I can only encourage the reduction of administrative hurdles and complexity. That is certainly encouraging to engage in the process to every one of us. But I think that there's no time to lose to promote actually the curiosity and openness towards anything that is coming from beyond your own turf. And this is something that can be done on a daily basis. And definitely it needs to be part of the career advancement criteria and system to actually make a point about international mobility in whatever way and length as part of the catalog of criteria you need to fulfill. And I think any engagement of researchers in bringing also colleagues from abroad for short-term stay, or to connect to diaspora, to co-organize a workshop, is a step and an element of brain circulation, and does not necessarily mean your own physical mobility, especially in times where it might not be that easy to be physically mobile, and that's what we've all been into for the past few months. So I think anything that opens up our communities is a very important element to create internationalized environments in which we improve excellent work.
You mean in the sense of awareness and acceptance of the idea of internationalization as something normal and it should be encouraged?
Absolutely. And there is still a lot of space for improvement, I suppose.
Okay, thank you very much for that intervention. And yes, I think it's these three points that we've made about simplifying rules, synergizing existing programs, and generally just kind of promoting the idea within academic communities and broad communities of the importance of mobility and internationalization. I mean, these, as you know, could be done very quickly and without a high cost. So that's a good idea as a recommendation. So maybe another question. Actually, there's a concrete question that we got via our chat. So from Brian Cahill, who mentioned that the doctor, so in our keynote speaker, mentioned this the problem of the two-body problem of how a researcher, you know, finds it's very difficult to balance the professional requirements, the research requirements, and everything that comes with mobility with private life. And can any of you provide examples of how this dual career supports, so to really help researchers have a normal personal life? Can you give examples of good practice from your experiences of what kinds of measures could help address this problem? Maybe we could start with you, Ms. Krab, from your experience.
Yes, I think that is a very, very important aspect, that researchers are not just building blocks for European research area. They are humans with everything that comes with a human, with interests, family, etc. And in my country, I must say that the local authorities have made quite a lot of progress recently. Recent development in my own city here in Tartu is that the university, together with the local authority, opened a welcome center that would help all incoming researchers, but not only researchers, with all these practical issues. And I would like also to highlight the work that has been done now for many years by the Euraccess network across Europe that have been working quite hard to bring these questions to the highlight and also, of course, take steps in solving them.
Thank you very much. Dr. Antičić, do you have any perspective on this, on how to resolve this idea of the problem of balancing work life for early career researchers who are mobile?
Well, it's a difficult question. So as a researcher myself, well, I hope to become one again in a couple of weeks' time after the elections. Well, if one wanted to have a balanced life, research really is not the best field to go through. I mean, it is an extremely competitive field, and after you get your PhD, after working like an animal for 5-6 years or so, you're expected to be competitive to go for several postdocs, 2 or 3 postdocs for 2 or 3 years. In my field, which is experimental physics, it is a usual actually also in different countries. Otherwise, you're not considered a serious researcher. So it's difficult to balance it, but I mean, there are attempts to it. And I think things like if you're going somewhere, it should be much easier and for your spouse, for example, to also get a job. So it should be in a sense, prioritized in that sense that if you have a wife or girlfriend, so that she can come, he or she, depending, can come with you too and get a position too, because this constant movement is extremely psychological draining. And also, you know, for the big centers like universities, research institutions, to also things like, you know, facilities for children. This has been historically ignored. And it is a big mistake that it was ignored, but I know there are big attempts all around the EU to address this, and it should be even further down. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Maybe if I can come to you, Dr. von Stein-Tomic. So your presentation was about the push and pull factors relating to mobility. I guess it's a kind of assumption that it's always going to be about a more prestigious research institution, more money, but I'm sure it's more complicated than that. So, I mean, do you have any perspective on how it's the different kinds of factors that really that it's not all about prestige and money, but there's other, for example, like a small country, and you're talking about this risk of small nations and how they can survive in these issues. So in a way, maybe there's something else that can be done without having like extremely developed research infrastructures and high salaries to keep researchers here. And do you have any perspective on what those things could be?
Well, definitely. I would not call it more complicated, but rather more complex or even rich. There is many other components which need to be considered, and this is why I would like to stress that also the aspect of return mobility needs to be much more explored, because it's often the emotional attachments, the family ties, the language, the importance of your native language that you would want to reconnect and use, even though I'm a big advocate of English, but let's not forget about especially in social sciences and humanities, the importance of communicating in your own language. These are factors that actually pull researchers to return and come back. Also, emotional attachments are crucial for wanting to contribute to the development and innovation and connectivity of your own home environment, and to improve to get it connected and networked internationally. There is ample examples of returning researchers who have been really acting as bridge builders, as innovators, as those who push the connectivity internationally, who have provided their networks for their home communities and included peers into the whole story. I think it is worthwhile to really look into research about return migration, who will tell you a lot more about these factors. And what I also would like to stress, what has been mentioned before, we mustn't consider families and spouses and partners as collateral, but rather as the whole package you get with a researcher. And an unhappy researcher, disconnected from family or not, or knowing that the family is suffering as a collateral in brain circulation, is not helping the whole exercise. Therefore, there is a lot to do, and I think if we look across the Atlantic, we have many best practice examples to actually be inspired by.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Antičić, for that intervention. I saw a couple of weeks ago, actually, a report, I think from 2018, from the European Council of Regions about brain drain. And one of the recommendations is actually to engage in a dialogue with the talent that's at risk of leaving, to see what are the factors that are key for them. Is it really just about the financial or socioeconomic, or is there something else that could be addressed regionally, locally, to make sure that the researchers who may be willing to stay under certain conditions, just to see what those factors are and to try and see if can we address those locally and regionally. So maybe on that point, coming back to you, Dr. Antičić, and coming back to so we looked at the European picture, but if you wouldn't mind providing us with a picture of Croatia, and I think this is now actually, we're in the last 5 minutes of our session. But we heard about Estonia, but could you tell us from your perspective as a state secretary, Croatia, it's a smaller country. There's more challenges with the research infrastructure. How have we tried to address this in this country to stem the brain drain, to encourage return, and maybe some practices and lessons learned from your experience?
Yes, very good question, and the answer actually is very complex, but I'll try to have it in a couple of minutes. So Croatia is faced has an existing, very old-fashioned higher education and research system from the days of Yugoslavia and such, which is very similar to the system in many ways of the Eastern Bloc, Soviet Union and such, even though we're not, the system was very similar. So it's very old-fashioned, old professors who control everything, very low mobility or no mobility, bad, complicated system. We are trying to change it. It's very difficult because as a result of the system, which has been for not decades, generations, the academia and such is actually in Croatia, and I think that the same is true in many other countries in the EU. Academia is a key, the average academician in Croatia is a key person who's actually blocking change because things work so well for them, but on the world stage, you really have to be more flexible and more competitive. So, we introduced several measures, which actually work extremely well. For example, it's in Croatia right now, it's trivially easy to get a permanent new position if you're coming back. If you're coming from the States, Germany, Italy, whatever, if the institution wants you there, in effective unlimited number of positions, new positions for you, and even if you are actual foreigner, so to make the country more attractive. This has been used by some institutions extremely well, but unfortunately some universities are not used at all, which emphasizes the problem. So we in fact have a new law already, which we hope to have in a public discussion soon, so it's going to be interesting, which has many measures towards mobility. In fact, as I was listening to my Estonian colleague, several measures they have implemented there, we're trying to implement here, like you need a postdoc outside the country or things like this. You need project success to get a position, to have a permanent position. We also plan in this law to introduce the concept of tenure track positions. And we also introduce the concept of pay, which can get scaled up depending on your project success. So to make the idea is to identify the best ones which have the project international success and to build an ecosystem around them. And it's not easy, but there are some successes. And so, for example, our ERC numbers last year, we had 3 of them, which, okay, may not be much from many other countries. For Croatia, it's huge because the year before we had 1, 2 years before we had 0. So the ERC grantees, for example, they get extra positions, permanent positions, and new students from the system and such. So identify the best ones and build a system around them in a sense to break the deadlock of the existing academia. Very difficult, but there is no other way to do it.
No, thank you for that perspective, and as a very concrete response, because it's a large problem that's not just from a couple of years ago. It's over several generations and over several. It's a broad problem, but you're trying through a range of measures to kind of, in a way, flip it into the system so it gradually becomes institutionalized as the research internationalization becomes normalized and brain circulation therefore becomes facilitated in the longer term. So thank you for that response. I think, ladies and gentlemen, we have no more questions and we are now reaching the end of the session. So I would like to thank all of you for joining us and for making such excellent contributions to the discussion. I love the fact that we actually have some, again, recommendations coming out of this already in terms of the quick wins, in terms of simplifying rules, more synergy with existing programs, and more promotion of the importance of internationalization and mobility. And that we've also identified that it's not just a question of the push and pull factors, are not just a question of prestige and salary levels, but there are a range of other issues that can also be addressed locally to ensure that there's brain gain and not just brain drain. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you to the participants for also sending in your questions via the chat. And thank you. I think that we are now ready to move on to our next session, which is the MSCA Awards. So thank you to our speakers and goodbye.